Hello. Good evening. Thank you for turning up to the panel. It's great to see so many of you here. I hope you've had a great day and learned a lot and found some interesting insights. Today we want to talk a little bit about perhaps some reflections from today, but I do encourage you to please ask questions, ask insights. We'll be using Slido, so please submit any questions you would like for the panelists via that, and I'll be keeping track of them here. But before we do, I'd like to introduce the panelists that we have today. So at the end, we have Dave Thomas, has a wide spectrum of experience in the software industry as an executive investor, board member, consultant, architect, and engineer, basically everything. He's chairman of Badera Corp and provides consulting on technology and business strategy for emerging technology products and services, and also provides virtual CTOs as well as directors, advisors, and mentors to support new initiatives. Lots of stuff. So lots of experience, great things to hear. In the middle, we've got Rutuja Joshi. She's a principal transformation leader and coach with GoTo Technologies, former LogMeIn. She has a wide range of experience in coaching multiple product teams and over 14 years of experience in engineering at different leadership roles. She brings in multiple perspectives when it comes to product management, leading and coaching teams, avid learner, strong presentation and communication skills. Her expertise lies with OKR transformations, driving organizational change using team topologies, Agile, and product management. And finally, we have Susanne Kaiser. She's an independent tech consultant from Hamburg, Germany, supporting organizations with building socio-technical systems, passionate about connecting the dots between Wardley mapping, domain-driven design, and team topologies as a holistic approach to designing and building adaptive systems for a fast flow of change. She's also worked as a previous startup CTO with background in computer science and experience in software development. And she's also working on her own book, which I heard will come out maybe next year. Excellent. So today, we've got the theme of Agile meets architecture. And often one of the things that we hear a lot in Agile is this idea about emergent design. I won't talk about emergent architecture. That was maybe discouraged today. So I want to maybe start off with hearing, did any themes emerge for any of you? And if so, what were some of those themes? I think some of your microphones will be working too. So Rutuja, maybe if you'd like to start.
I hope this is working. Yeah. Am I audible? Great. So I think, first of all, incredible talks. But one thing, if I figured out that everybody is figuring out how to solve organizational problem. And is it agile? Is it architecture? How do we complement each other? Another thing, I think team topology, I heard like 20 times since morning. So I think that was like the talk of the town. So yeah, interesting to learn how everyone shared their perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you mentioned team topologies in your talk, Susanne. So maybe you can also think about what themes emerged for you today.
Yeah, so I guess it's not only bringing different perspectives together, and so I was not, to be honest, I have to admit, I was not attending so many talks because I arrived later today. So, but what I have heard was that team topologies was, of course, the topic, and I was thinking when I gave my talk, oh damn, I'm just repeating all the content that everyone else in their talks have already talked about, because it was not, when I started talking about this topic a couple of years ago, there was like only a few hands were coming up, and now it's really, you are transforming your organization with team topologies, with actual use cases, and I guess that is an emergent topic that came up a lot.
Great, thank you. And Dave?
I thought that everyone was pretty much in agreement. That was my sense. I thought that all the talks had, in general, a good message and a consistent message. I'm glad that we plunged the knife into the heart of emergence, and that. But I think really a lot of similar ideas, kind of reinforcing, and I think emphasizing that good architecture is mandates curation. That I think you have to continuously invest. So if you don't. You need it in your backlog, right? That you're curating your architecture, at least every release, so that you have something that you can go to.
Great, excellent. So I can see a couple of things, and I'd encourage your audience to continue adding things into Slido. But I think one interesting question here is, there's a question about, is it harder to change architecture or organizations, and why? So yeah, maybe Rutuja, since you've been working with team topologies, changing your organization, you probably have perspectives on both. So what is your perception, architectural organizations, and why?
So is it okay if I completely answer differently? So it's not either or, right?
Sure.
I think the hardest to change is mindset. It's so difficult. No matter how great frameworks you implement, you can get there, but the hardest is how do you change the culture and the mindset? We don't want to change. It's so difficult for every one of us, you know? So I think this resistance or whatever we are doing is right. Why change? All these kind of questions which keep popping, I think this is something which can be a barrier sometime. So I think I never came across a situation where it was harder to change, a specific organization structure or anything which is architecture-centric or even team-centric. But I think it was all about mindset. It's here, and I think that's the most hardest thing to break.
Dave or Susanne?
Yeah, I would say that the moment where you try to change a team comes with a lot of fear. Even though, I guess for me, what I've experienced so far is that changing teams was very challenging in terms of, oh, we are changing, why should we change? We're working well together, what is the reason behind it? And what is coming next? And it's not going to work out. So it was correlated with the mindset involved, but I would say that team change and also how to communicate it and how to calibrate dynamic reteaming, for example, from Heidi Halfen. She has written a very great book about it, how to mitigate this fear with changing teams, have a team calibration session on your mission and your how you would like to work together. And so I guess the fear changing team structure is also very beside also the mindset.
All right, and Dave?
So it's probably a little edgy, but I've had a beer. So my wife ran HR at OTI, and used to be very angry with me until she finally agreed. And basically, my thesis is that neither people nor organizations really change unless they're put under a lot of pressure. When that pressure is removed, they return to their stable state. So the only things I've seen really work are to build a culture, a new culture essentially outside that organization, in a new organization. 3M was famous for doing this, but lots of other people have as well. I mean, even at OTI, when we went to IBM, the agreement with IBM is we would not merge with IBM for 7 years because their software culture was so toxic. And what we did is we moved 500 IBM people into the OTI labs until we had 500 people that had the same culture, and then we merged that back in to IBM. I understand the wonderful thing. There's a lot of great coaches, but my fundamental observation is that basically people and organizations being of people really only change under situations of high stress. They can be opportunities, but even then, they're often easier to change by building a new business unit that can actually execute in that plan and moving others into that, or having even better the people that IBM just said, we want these people to come back and share their experiences with us so we can do it. So that probably is pretty contrarian, but that's my experience.
Oh, interesting. So I heard something about putting pressure on teams to incite change. Rutuja, so you talked about mindset. Do you agree with that, or what's your perspective? Did you put some pressure on your teams to sort of help them through that mindset shift, or what did you do instead?
Yeah, so I would say, Pat, when I say mindset, if you have this changing mindset, like no matter what, we have to keep evolving, we have to keep adapting. So then either be it organizational change or team change, architecture change, product change, anything change. If I have change mindset within, then it doesn't matter what changes I need to do in my ecosystem, I'll adapt. So I think it starts within you. So once you get into this culture of change is the only constant, and I accept it, I think it's much easier, and then you can adapt faster. So I think the organizations for tomorrow, I mean the successful organizations are the one who rapidly change and believe in this, that change is the only constant.
Okay, I get that, which is the change starts with you, which I also believe as a coach. And I'm interested in understanding how you change the mindset of others. So what sort of mechanisms do you have? Is there some sort of pressure, or how do you start spreading that change mindset with other people?
So should I take this, or?
Yeah.
All right. So recently I read a book, quite interesting. It talks about peacetime leaders and wartime leaders. So I have this experience in my career. I met leaders who led by example, who showed this path that we have to change, we have to adapt. So I think certain things, when they are done by leaders, in a way, oh wow, this is how this organization operates. And if that leader is demonstrating this and leading our way, probably that's the way. I mean, you have to believe in the story of that leader. So the ones who believe in that mindset will change and go forward. And the one who will not will unfortunately either change job or leave the organization. So I believe that the leader should, start demonstrating these kind of change management or this approach or mindset. So it starts from there.
Great, Dave.
So I actually agree. The problem is the leader's usually gone within 3 years. In my experience, any change in an organization depends on 3 people. You need an executive sponsor, you need a director-level person that believes in it, who's got the execution responsibility. You need some sort of technical enthusiast who can be your enemy because they become the agilista, right? They want everyone to do it, and you have to say, no, slow back. We don't need everyone to do TDD today because we have to actually have training and so on. But if you lose any of those 3 sponsors, your whole transformation training program fails. And the reality is a number of outstanding leaders who actually have integrity that stand up, that you can trust in most organizations. At least perhaps I was in the losers, but in a very short supply. So, and most serious transformation journeys are like 5-year journeys, and most companies cannot sustain them and cannot sustain the leadership team. I'm sorry if I'm depressing you, but but go start another company or convince your organization to build this new thing that they're going to do as a separate enterprise, and then scale that up and bring it in. That does work.
Do you have anything to add to that?
So adding to that one is also like what I've experienced so far is like whenever you impose something that didn't work very well, but if you are more imposing on what to do, but focusing on the why we are doing it, and also like try to make this decision for change transparent throughout the entire organization, also not only from your current team level, but also from a broader perspective, like that's the reason, for example, I like to bring in waterline mapping, because it does show the landscape that you as an organization is operating and competing in, and also to transport this information to all the teams, like, okay, this is our current situation, and this is the landscape, or this is our competitor landscape we are competing with, and we have to change this, otherwise they are overpassing us or something like that. So to bring every change, also to explain it with a why we are doing it, and hopefully the mindset will change.
That's the pressure. That's the pressure.
That's the pressure.
Yeah.
So not imposing. I was understanding your pressure was imposing, but instead it's the why to.
Well, but no, I mean, I'm not suggesting you go and beat people. I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting.
I would love to see this.
I mean, suggesting that basically, people change because of this pressure, right? And the other question is, do the leaders actually, when they talk the walk, do they actually understand? Like Agile and agility get confused a lot. Agility basically is the ability to respond, be more productive, flexibly adapt, which has nothing to do with the Agile contract, right? And so, often there's a committed executive, committed to agility, right? very much. But, the Agilista have basically done the wink, wink, nod, nod. Only Jeff Sutherland believes in hyper-productivity, right? Everybody else knows it's about doing less better. And so is there a real connect at the executive level, at the leadership level, or is there a fundamental disconnect about what the impact of doing Agile or architecture or both have?
All right, it looks like you wanted to add something.
Pat,
Rutuja.
just a little bit more context here. When we say change, so it's not like just because we want to change, we change. That change needs to be aligned with what result or outcome you want to drive as an organization. Are we changing to meet customer needs? Are we changing to sustain our business? Or is it we want to reach to our North Star? Or is it about generating value? What is it for what we need to change? So even the leaders needs to communicate that, hey, we change for X, Y, Z. So I think it's not like a change in infinite direction with no goal. So I think that also needs to be taken into consideration. If there is no need to change, we don't change. So I think as simple as that.
Great. Excellent. So lots of perspectives on change, pressure, and what type of pressure. Let's change tack for a little bit here. So there is another question here. Suppose an Agile team still has an org that requires big design upfront, slow architectural reviews with leaders. How do you keep up with the speed of the team? So have any of you experienced this, and what would you recommend? Susanne?
So what I've experienced is more like, divide and conquer, like in terms of that, for example, making design decisions, for example, in their teams, but also sharing it across the clusters or however they are organized in a larger organization. With, for example, we've talked about architecture decision records, but putting them up front, not having them with a decision already in mind, but discussing the pros and cons and the impacts that they see, for example, and sharing this throughout the entire organization for collecting feedback from like the architecture design decision they do and what impact they will have it on their clusters. And that would be one idea that comes up in my mind.
Dave?
There's kind of two answers. One is no hope. But the other is that basically, if this is sort of a process compliance problem, it's like the Agile people go in and they say, well, we can't possibly use Primavera or one of these tools because we use velocities and stories and you idiots use, project management terms. And so you get this just ridiculous conflict. When in general, so I call that respect the organizational API, right? If they need to use Microsoft Project, just take the stuff out of your backlog and convert it into whatever they need. Which is basically the principle of, fake it till you make it. And often, as long as you can provide these people evidence that you're going through the same sort of gates, and I'll use the word gate, that they like, they'll be basically fine with that. On the other hand, if it's a very draconian, for instance, medical approval or something like that, you'll have to actually work with the standards committees. There's a gentleman here, actually, I was talking to. But there has, for 5 or 6 years, been progress in the medical community on how to revise the medical processes so that they can apply Agile techniques. And so I think the place to try and fix that is by basically going out to parallel industries, people in their industry, and see, well, this is how they do it there. Try and get some of those people in to speak about how they do it. If another car company in Germany is doing it and they're not, they will say it's ridiculous, but they'll listen very much when they hear it talked about. So try and, conspire to work with other people so that they can learn from peers, because you're different. But if they hear it from one of their peers, then often they'll say, oh, maybe we could think about that.
Yeah, pressure from competition, that could potentially work. Rutuja, do you have any experience?
I 100% agree with what you said. I think it's all about learning from the industry. So I think this exchanging knowledge and learning about the good practices, I think this is the right way to go.
Great. Okay, so I think this is actually a really good question for you, Rutuja, because Goto is a large organization. And so I think what happens in large organizations is people want career growth. So this question says how to avoid over-architecture when career growth means bigger and more visible projects.
So that made me move from my chair. All right. So I think, first of all, you also have to have a culture of simplicity. If you remember one of the manifesto, I think, the art of simplicity. I think the more simpler things you can achieve in your product or in your architecture, I think the lightweight, the simpler architecture is the architecture for the future. So I mean, if you can have this kind of approach in your organization, that keep it simple, stupid simple, I think that's the philosophy with which most of the leaders or tech leaders should try and drive. So so I heard an incident around, I think, water cooler conversations we were having, and couple of years back, and two engineers were talking about, you know, this new guy who has just joined? Wow, what an awesome coder he is. No one can understand his code. So, I mean, is it good, bad? You can decide, but I think it's all about simplicity. If no one can read your code, that's not you're being an awesome coder, probably it's called job security. So I would say it's all about keeping things simple. So that's what we try and practice and go to. Most of our architecture community and guilds, they focus on how can we simplify it. Yep. Simplify and simplify.
Great. Dave?
I think one of the issues is looking at the metrics. I mean, metrics are your friend, like tests, right? And if you don't work on the metrics and make them, Randy mentioned the DORA metrics and so on. These are good metrics, and typically you find out that people who build sort of more grandiose things with a lot more code in them end up with bad metrics. It's quite, if they don't, well, then they deserve whatever they're doing because they're getting more running. So metrics which focus on value in particular and quality delivery are very, they speak very strong for the team. So the key thing is to get off the number of developers and the head counts and reports and things like that and focus on what's actually being delivered. If you measure those, then I've never seen the case where basically, one of my one-liners is shut up and ship. Those who ship get to speak, right? And if you just keep producing code, it may take you one or two, releases, but pretty soon people, take attention and they say, see what these guys are doing and so on. So I think that puts the end to the, let's do it big and fancy.
Great. Susanne, have you ever had to manage an engineer that wanted to over-engineer everything because they saw it as a career promotion?
Not as a career promotion from the first intention, but over-engineered, of course, a lot of things. And it was like the impact that it had was, in terms of like onboarding, explaining the over-engineered solution. It took a long time to eliminate over-engineered solutions. So but not from a career path for growth.
All right. Well, I think the next question is great for you because it's really about the inverse Conway maneuver. You talked about changing the organization. So this question is, what would you recommend to a company that intends to perform the inverse Conway maneuver? So I would try to first focus on the coming also back to the Wattler map. I'm sorry, I'm repeating that, but coming back to Wattler map, like what are your users and user needs, and try to find the components or modules that are fulfilling this user needs directly or indirectly, and to focus on your problem domain that you would like to solve, what kind of problems you would like to solve, and try to find good themes to split, to modulize your
system itself to, for example, bringing in a domain-driven design perspective, designing bounded context, for example. It doesn't mean that you need to follow a microservices architecture style, but to, for example, also monoliths could also work very well. And to focus on your business behavior first, where you find suitable seams to split your system apart. And then also the dependencies between these components, these bounded contexts, for example, and then also try to find suitable team boundaries. For example, bounded context can give you a good indication, and go from there. What problems you are trying to focus on, what problems you would like to, business behavior you would like to implement, and where to find business behavior that relate to each other, where you can then find suitable seams to split your system apart and go from there, and align your teams accordingly, your business behavior in form of, for example, of bounded context. And then try to reorganize your teams. And there I would highly recommend also the dynamic reteaming patterns that Heidi Halfand has beautifully described in her book, Dynamic Reteaming, and how to reorganize your team in dynamic restructuring your team.
Great. Dave or Rutuja, do you have any advice for anyone about to perform the inverse Conway maneuver?
So maybe just a quick one that probably your desired architecture should map or align with your business value. And then you should evolve your teams based or which promotes this desired architecture, which is mapped to your business. So I think all these teams needs to be skilled, or the staffing needs to be done, which promotes this overall target architecture where you're moving. I think that's on.
Great. Anything to add?
This is a sort of micro thing to that, but one of the big problems is that companies don't actually do domain training. So one of the reasons that developers are in difficult situations, they don't actually understand the domain. I mean, that's one of the reasons why you have to make the stories, you have to cut the worms so small that the Agile developers can eat them, because they don't understand what net present value is, right? So, what good companies do, and I worked with one very fortunate in the finance area, and they would basically hire new grads and train them in capital markets, and functional programming. And they made a ton of money with consultants, because the consultants understood, even as young grads, they understood the vocabulary in the domain. And many people actually love it once they get into the domain, but they're lost, right? And developers are very uncomfortable because they don't understand the vocabulary. This causes mistakes and all other things. So, you should invest very heavily in domain vocabulary and domain language and its use in a way so that people understand the domain. Then they're more comfortable moving between them because they know the path, right? If you've been stuck in purchasing forever and someone says there's a great chance for you in accounting, you'll be very nervous because you don't understand the domain and like the expertise. So the opportunity to have real training in the domain and learn about the business is something that most technical people don't even get offered.
Some great advice there, and I hope you're better prepared to execute the inverse Conway maneuver, whoever asked that question. All right, let's talk about team topologies and about the topic about enabling teams. So this is probably for Rutuja or Susanne to start off with. Team topologies talks about an architect team should transition into an enabling team. How do you define an enabling team from an architecture perspective? Who would like to start?
I don't believe in architecture teams, and I don't believe in that either.
All right.
Their proposal. I mean, basically, architecture is a role, just like tester and everything like that. Basically, what you want are, full function players. Maybe they don't know how to do database, but they at least know how to write SQL queries. They don't, I don't do database. I'm a Java developer. That's just not a whole complete developer.
So I would not consider them as an architecture team, but an architecture enabling team to bring it together. It's more about that they enable the streamlined teams to identify and acquire their missing capabilities in regards to architecture. and also about like best practices, for example, how to implement a hexagonal architecture or something like that they can enable, but they are not actively involved in the architectural decision. They are enabling these streamlined teams to make this decision, to make them self-sustainable and
they should have people on the team that know how to do that.
Exactly. Yes, they have, of course, they are cross-functional autonomous teams, but sometimes some teams are...
So as a bootstrap technique, I could see it, but not as a care and feeding continuously.
Yeah, I mean, the cross-functional teams, they have like these, I mean, from every aspect, it's not only architecture, it's also security, it's UX.
Yeah,
exactly. So, exactly. So, and if you have to, I guess, there's 15 different capabilities in every streamline teams, then you're 15 at least 15 people strong teams, and this is something that that some of them that they have that these capabilities are not assigned to specific persons in the team, but the team itself has the capability and the possibility to make architecture decisions.
That's what principal engineers or distinguished engineers do in the organizations I'm in. They basically row, so they're available, but they're not in a team.
Yes. Yeah.
Rutuja, it looks like you have something to add.
Yeah, so maybe my perspective, right, wrong, I don't know. Well, I'm a believer that, forming an enabling team out of all the architects together, I'm not a big fan of that solution. I like that we have these communities where we have architects community, or we have design community, we have agile community, wherein they all constantly upskill themselves in terms of what's happening, how the industry is trending in terms of these topics. And they constantly try and bring in fresh perspective and the new ways of working when it comes to all these topics. Enabling team in particular, I feel when there's a stream-aligned team, which is responsible for deploying a particular service or feature whatsoever, enabling team can be formed, can also be dissolved. It can be for time being, that for example, the stream-aligned team is fast-flowing. We do not want to impede their speed just because they want to know something about infrastructure automation. So they should go with the same speed. Enabling team should be formed to just upskill or bridge that capability gap. They can stay alive if the topic is used by multiple stream-aligned teams, or they can just be dissolved. So I do not have a straight answer that whether we should have this architecture enabling team. I'm a big fan of working and running communities, which can be there forever.
All right, so what I'm hearing here is if you have an architect team, that's not the end goal, there's different ways, so maybe about upskilling, training, it should be a temporary transition to an enabling team, long-term, hopefully, a perhaps self-sustaining community sharing knowledge amongst each other with the end goal of having those architecture skills within those teams. All right, let's move on to an interesting question here about metrics. So we know that metrics are an interesting thing here. So somebody here asks, when or how do you detect that metrics become a game? So when, I guess, somebody is trying to game a metric, so take advantage or manipulate a metric that's being used. Can you think of an example or share an experience?
So I was about to give a short story. I'm a storyteller.
Please, tell the story.
So imagine I go to a hospital, a cardiac hospital, and I ask this person on the reception, hey, I want to know who is the best cardiac surgeon in your hospital. And this woman get baffled because she doesn't have such a list. There are 20 cardiac surgeons. And then she tell me, come tomorrow, I'll give you a list. She prepares a list, and when I go next morning, she tell me, look, cardiac surgeon number 1, he's number 1 because he performs 100 surgeries in a month. The second guy do 80 surgeries in a month. The third do 65 surgeries in a month. So the list go on. All right, so according to her, the output of surgeries, number of surgeries, define the best surgeon. But my next question is, what is the success rate? How many patients are still alive out of the 100 surgeries this first doctor did? And then that turned the game, because the first doctor did 100 surgeries where only 5 patients survived. But the second one did 80 surgeries where 60 patients survived. So now, when we talk about manipulating the matrix, it's all about how are you putting your quality and quantity matrix together. It's all about using output and outcome. You can't judge your performance based on this one pointer. You need to have combination of metrics. Does that help?
Okay, sounds good. Dave?
I think you can game any metric. Yeah. And that's why you use multiple metrics in general. I think people, and Randy has firsthand experience, along with Dave Farley and a number of other people, using these DORA metrics. And while it's possible to game them, there are patterns that people are used to seeing now. And I think they're pretty stable. I mean, there are stupid metrics like counting the number of comments, lines, and characters of code and things like that. But I think we have, and the other thing is basically ask people. Right. One of the things we always have. Part of this, every sprint process, there's sort of a questionnaire, like, sprint reviews go quickly, and, at least the review part, the retrospective goes on into the discussion and so on. But one of the things we basically do is there's a questionnaire, and usually they just fill it in, we're fine, right? But if they're really upset, everybody can fill the thing in, right? And so you just just go around and say, if there's something if you've got a smell, an organizational smell, like a code smell, like the metric smell, then basically send it. Most people have the ability to broadcast in the organization. Who else thinks these metrics are sucked and they're being gamed? You see a lot of hands go up, or people vote on an anonymous, and basically those signals get out. So if you're in a culture of fear, there's a problem, because you can't do that. And cultures of fear take special things to handle them. Fortunately, I'm scarier, so I don't really worry about that problem. But it's a very difficult problem to work in a culture of fear to make those changes and so on. And that's a much longer discussion. But I think in general, if you think something sucks, you should say it. That's part of Agile. It's part of having feedback, right? And if it's a positive organization, it will want to fix that and say, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be counting comments.
Great. Anything to add, Susanne?
There was this phrase like, tell me your metrics and I tell you how I will behave. And I guess that's also like with gaming metrics is that you then behave differently, and the outcome is not as you originally intended. And I guess it could also have a very bad outcome. So,
all right, thank you for the reminder of that great saying. All right, so let's talk about this next question that comes in, which is, if there is a perceived conflict between Agile and architecture, what are the most important things we can do to bring the communities together? Who would like to start? Rutuja?
I can take that up, okay. I think Agile and architecture, they need to be complementing. So it cannot be like either or. So it's a complementing thing. It's like two wheels of a scooter, right? So they need to go hand in hand. Another thing, if there's a conflict, who wins? Your North Star, your customer value. So what are we solving for? So maybe you should bring the Agile side and the architecture side together and show them what are we solving for, and we both need to align in that direction, and we need to be friends to get there. So I think that's how you can solve it.
Great. Let me piggyback on something you said earlier, which is you talked about communities. So imagine that you have within your organization, an Agile community, coaches, Scrum Masters, whatever you want to call them, and you have an architecture community. How do you bring them together? What would be some advice you would give people?
So we do a lot of cross-tech talks, wherein we encourage people that they should learn about each other. I mean, I don't need to be an expert. If I'm an architect, I don't need to be an expert of Agile, or vice versa. But definitely, I need to understand the mindset and what are the good ways of working together. So I think there should be some rules of engagement. I understand you, you understand me. So I think we encourage this cross kind of tech talk sessions or knowledge sharing things. Yeah.
Great, excellent. Dave, you've probably seen organizations that can bring Agile and architecture well together or not. How would you recommend people bring them closer together?
Well, again, I come back. I don't see Agile or architecture as a job. I see it as a role. And basically, I don't have any, and none of the companies I have that I've been involved with have architects. They have principal engineers or distinguished engineers, whatever, some of which are much stronger in architecture, some are much stronger at coding, some are great leaders, and they're voted, a distinguished engineer at IBM was actually voted there by the employees, by other engineers. So you've got a collective feedback. That doesn't mean IBM executives don't tamper with who gets it, but it does mean that they're really voted there by people who trust them. So they have a unique property in the sense that they've gained that trust and respect from other employees on a numbers count basis. So I think that helps. I think the cross, communities of practice are a great idea. The history is they die out, right? Basically, no, there's no one to speak. We're too busy. I mean, so sustaining community of practice is a real serious challenge. I agree, they're fantastic. Bringing speakers in that are on the edge, right? I mean, you bring someone. I mentioned Simon. He'll be here tomorrow. But basically, Simon gets along well with both communities. So, and can tell, it's entertaining. So people like that are, Martin Fowler and things like that. Basically, people that sort of cross the cultures help a lot. But I think one of the first things you have to look at is this really an Agile or architecture problem, or have you got really a people problem in your org, right? Is this, sort of a power structure problem? Something, the process says that, I get the last vote. I mean, is it something like that that's really the underlying problem as opposed to a misunderstanding between Agile and architecture per se?
Great, thank you very much. Let's change topics here. So Susanne, you've worked in a startup that has grown before. So how do we work to keep agility, simplicity, and autonomy in an organization as we grow, as opposed to, quote, fixing them in an already large and dysfunctional org?
Sorry.
So you're in a startup and it's growing. How do you try to maintain agility, simplicity, and autonomy as it grows?
So it's coming back, for example, from the team topologies perspective. One approach is also to change, for example, the interaction modes between teams in terms of like evolving the team interactions, and also that team can go in facilitation mode, for example, when exploring new technologies or new approaches, and sharing knowledge through other teams while they go into facilitation mode, for example, and sharing knowledge throughout the organization while it's growing. To build new teams, to onboard them, and going from, for example, close collaboration, close facilitation, into later on into limited collaboration, limited facilitation, and sharing knowledge across teams while building new teams, for example, one approach.
Great. Any other tips that you've seen in other organizations? Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I mean, I think it's always a challenge. I mean, there's been a lot of studies. There's a guy called Itzhak Adizes, who you've probably never heard of. But before, there's these books called, was it Inside the Tornado, and Jeffrey Moore? Well, actually, everything he wrote about came from Itzhak Adizes, right? Who basically has this whole theory of the kind of people you need in your company at a certain stage in your company. In fact, the whole Crossing the Chasm curves are right out of Itzhak's original books. Those, and he calls it a startup, a go-go company, because he wrote them a long time ago. So it does show that you need different kinds of personalities in the organization as the organization changes and grows. And I think, you have to pay attention to that if you're really sort of into hyper growth, because the kinds of people, there are some people that are, just good at getting things out, knocking out the first two versions. There are people that are just amazing at doing that. And the thing to do is sort of keep deploying them on the fronts where you need them and bringing in the people who are better at dealing with the more mature parts, they're looking at so Susanne talked about the more mature components and using people with sort of different skills and backgrounds in terms of doing that. So I think you do have to do that planning, and there are some people that you just grow past, unfortunately.
I can also add to that one, like bringing in Simon Wardley again. Then one of the doctrinal principles from Wardley mapping is think aptitude and attitude, and this also goes into that perspective as well, that the teams are not only like gather together due to that skill set, their aptitude, but also their mindset, their attitude. So you have different personal preferences. So sometimes some people are more happy with exploration, experimenting, discovering. And some other people are very afraid of experimenting, and they don't have a clear path to action. You have to deal with the unknown unknowns, and also to group your teams where you have these different mindsets. So from pioneers with experimenting and exploring, or settlers that are like to improve and stabilize, or the town planners that like to mature and optimize, and then also is more in regards to scalability. And to group your teams or organize your teams around also not only about the skill set they have, but also around the mindset that they have.
Great. So recognize there's a stage at which organizations at, and then maybe the people and skills needed for that. Excellent. Let's talk about fear. So we're all fearful about something. Rutuja, so fear is a big obstacle in any change. Who is typically most afraid when Agile is introduced, and why do you think that might be?
Okay, so I agree with the first statement, but then you said, who is the most fearful when Agile is introduced?
That's what the question here is.
All right, so it depends on what kind of Agile you are introducing, right? So, I mean, personally speaking, if this Agile is all about, are you doing 15 minutes daily stand-up? Why did you do 25 daily stand-up today, 25 minutes? Or is it about what kind of stories are you taking this time in the backlog? So, you have a lot of managers coming in the meeting and talking about all this. So I'm not sure what kind of Agile you're talking about. So it totally depends on the adoption of your agility. Like, is it just talking about Scrum principles and how good Scrum we do? Or is it about principles of Agile? Are we respecting each other in our team? Do we have courage to speak up in front of the 2 tech leads who are sitting right now in this refinement? So it totally depends on, is it value-centric? Is it principle, manifesto-centric? Or is it just about framework-centric?
So if you were to make some assumptions about what type of Agile, what sort of people might be fearful and why?
So let's say if we foster the value centricity, so definitely the power game will change here. So if you have an organization who runs in a lot of hierarchical way, you have a lot of decision makers, like hippo people, like highest income or paid person's opinion, something like that. So if you have such kind of people, the power is shifting, right, to the teams. They won't like it. So then probably they will be in the position where they want control, and they will not like these flat hierarchy. We are agile, we are cross-functional, we are autonomous, we are empowered, etc., etc. So I think the fear would start there. So it depends on what kind of hierarchy you have. But then if it is all about number of bugs, velocity, then the passionate programmers will hate it, because they don't want to waste time into counting number of bugs we fixed and what's the velocity looking like, and do estimation, forceful estimation, even when we do not have clarity around requirements. So I think there are 2 sides. Right.
Great, thank you. And Dave, you talked about Agile versus agility before, but maybe from your side, who's typically most afraid when Agile, in whatever interpretation you'd like to have, is introduced, and why?
There's individuals who, for instance, don't understand the practices that they have to change. So, we've had things like, we've done 4 C++, like test-driven development is something where lots of people just don't understand it, don't have any experience doing it, and really need mentoring and coaching. The most successful technique we've used is basically, we did it for, the company was Cognos, but it's an IBM company now. But they had, a lot of C++ code and, some really hardcore C++, get your Agile stuff and, stuff it, and so what we did is we came up with this idea of basically, you can't TDD that, or this rather, you can't TDD this. And people submitted, things that couldn't be done, you can't test this. We picked across the company, I think it was around 2,000, I don't remember exactly, 400 to 2,000 developers. And we picked the top 10, and we got, Mike Feathers and Bob Martin and a bunch of well-known TDD enthusiasts in. And they spent a day working on these 10 problems, a couple hours each, I can't remember it was. And the winning teams, the ones that they couldn't convince, the teams got to vote whether they were convinced that TDD could work. The winning teams got to go for a big dinner and with the coaches and so on. And that sort of took it out of them and my fear into, look, we can show them they can't do it. And that'll prove to other people. So that's, sorry, it's a long story, but that's an example for an individual practice where people had a problem with, they were uncomfortable. You can try and find some way to not make it their problem, but make it some sort of fun thing where they can share and they can participate in sharing their fear. But in general, the people who really have the big problem for a serious Agile change is the middle management. And usually, in my experience, I always get the call after they were a really successful tech, booming organization, and then they screwed up, missed a release or two, and then the paper says they're now bringing in professional management. And usually what that means is you bring in 2 or 3 layers of passive-aggressive people who just follow the leader. And passive-aggressives are the enemy, basically. My only way I know to deal with a passive-aggressive is put a gun to their head and basically say, if the first one doesn't go into your head, the next one's going into mine. Because there is just no way. And there's always 2 or 3 layers of these people. These people hate it. They oppose it in every way. How do we do this in another company? With the best transition I did in an organization like this, we had a team of HR consultants. They're actually called career consultants. And what they did is they coached people on how to get promoted into senior management. Right? So they basically take the best and brightest in an organization that the organization wants to move up in whatever aspect of senior management. And we paired with them. And in the launch, we had these 1,000 people in the audience. We basically announced, here's the team. And Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we operate a mentor's office where people can come and meet a mentor, schedule stuff with their team. And Monday and Friday, these people manned the mentor's office. We had 4 senior executives walk to the back of the room during the opening of the kickoff and ask for counseling and help. So these people were really, because they knew these executives, these people really help people in their careers. They've helped us. So a credible consultant, there's no way, we're driving change. If you're driving the change, you can't be, I love you and take care of you. I'm sorry, right? Why would they believe you, right? So I've found that pairing with the really talented career consultants and so on who are sincerely concerned about the people and ideally have some relationship with the people in the organization. These people are, by the way, say, we are absolutely not HR consultants. There's a recent Microsoft exec to list that says, if you're in trouble, do not talk to HR. And I want to re-endorse that public statement. Do not get somebody like this that you can talk to. But middle management is always, in my experience, the real barrier, and getting them on board is.
Great. Thank you for sharing those stories and also some good advice about how to deal with perhaps some of that fear. Let's maybe go to this, jumping back to mindset, so back to Rutuja here. Somebody asks here, do we really have to change mindset, or is the challenge to bring out different mindsets together to make the most out of their strengths?
So I think this question, we were talking about mindset, it was with respect to change, right? So I'm unclear to understand that if I don't want change, and Pat, you want change, we are two different mindsets, right? We are working in a team. I say no to change. No, this is how we do things.
I want change.
No, we are not changing. I have been working here for 5 years. This is how we do deployment.
But I want to deploy more quickly.
What do you do now in this kind of scenario?
Yeah.
So I don't think that bringing different mindsets, I mean, it'll grow the conflict, rather. It'll cause more noise, right? It depends on the persona. Either one of us will give up, or change organization, or change team, or there will be escalations. I don't know. I don't have a right or a wrong answer here. But I think when I say mindset, you need to bring in people who believe that, hey, we all are in this game together, and we need change because we want to be faster than competition, or we want to solve this problem, or this is how our organization goal look like, and it requires that we change. So that's why I think this similar mindset needs to go in there. Otherwise, we'll keep on fighting.
I want to meet you again in 20 years.
Susanne.
I guess there are different mindsets and in an organization, and they are important in an organization. So, as I said earlier, we have these exploring, discovery mindset, and they can take ownership of components, bond context, whatever is part of the system that are changing, where we have an unclear path to action with a high level of uncertainty and dealing with the unknowns. But we also need the mindset of improving and stabilizing, and we need the mindset of maturing and optimizing. And these are different mindsets. So, and it's not like that we have to change them to. We can use different methods, we can have preferably agile methods in place, we can have lean methods in place, or Six Sigma. And they don't have to be all, the entire organization does not have to go all agile. And it has to be, or have to apply everywhere throughout the entire organization agile methods. Instead, we can apply different methods, like for example, for the evolution stages that when we do it on a Wortley map. So it's not like if you're not this mindset, then you're wrong for our organization. Instead, find the right team or the right domain where the people with their personal preferences are, feeling the most happy path with the most happy solution.
We have a phrase that we use. It's called, we don't have enough good guys. Basically, so this is a bit like storming the Bastille, right? Basically, if you're going to really change something, you need enough leaders, or enough capable resources to do it. And there are just some battles that you can't have and shouldn't have if you don't have sufficient numbers to be able to achieve that goal. And I think that's one of the things that if you're silly enough to work on a digital transformation or something like that.
Agile transformation.
Basically, you need to know whether or not, that's kind of your reachability, right? With, you need enough good guys with the executive support and things like that so you can achieve that. And it's much more important to de-scope your efforts and focus on changing some part of the system or something like that where you feel the positive energy, you can do it, than trying to figure out how you can convert all these people either with, religious speeches or, magic artifacts or whatever it is. And so the real shortage from my point of view in software is like it is in politics, it's leadership. So, where is the leaders? And middle managers are typically not leaders, right? They're basically followers in these large organizations. And, they're not change agents. And so, that's why the model of, and I just had this conversation with Dan North recently about, you need to do this outside that org because you need to be able to show them concretely with their own artifacts what can be done. And you can't do that inside the org given, the existing team. The existing team is very operationally focused, excellent operational delivery, but innovation is not their suit.
Great. And on that note about different mindsets, enough, and maybe in the wrong place or changing them, I think that's a good note to finish. So firstly, I want to thank the panelists. So can we please thank the panelists for today's discussion? Thank you very much for staying for the end of the panel. I hope you enjoyed day one. As a reminder, everything will be kicking off at 9 o'clock tomorrow, but the venue will need to scan you in as well, so make sure you leave enough time to watch the kickoff. Otherwise, we will see you all tomorrow. Have a good night.
Thank you, Pat.